Welcome to the DoD Contract Academy podcast, where we teach small businesses how to win big government contracts. You know, the US government is the single biggest purchaser of goods and services in the entire world. They buy just about everything, and they're required to make 23% of their purchases from small businesses. Yet, less than half of 1% of small businesses in the United States actually try to sell to the government, and that number's decreasing year over year. My name's Ricky Howard. I'm a former government procurement officer. I've managed over $82 billion in federal contracts. Now, I help small businesses sell their products, services, and solutions to federal agencies. If you're ready to start your government contracting adventure, head on over to dodcontract.com, where you can join our academy and learn the step-by-step process of winning federal contracts. Now, on to the podcast. Okay. Well, hey guys, welcome to this week's edition of the DoD Contract Academy podcast. And today we're doing a roundup of the federal spending for 2022. So if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know that I'm a big fan of taking advantage of the fact that the US government has to publish all of their purchasing information, right? So there's one big advantage we have selling to the government versus regular sales, because every contract has criteria that's going to be published. So we can see, for instance, how much the government spends in different categories. We can see how much they spend on small business contracts. We can see specific contracts, right? So if that building down the street was a government building and it was recently painted, you could probably find that contract online, at least certain criteria about it. And you could see if the business was a small business, or, by the way, I just had my dog Georgia jumping up here if you're watching this in the video. Sometimes we hang out in the morning and drink coffee and look at all the federal contracting numbers. So I know we're nerds, but hey, that's why you probably listen, right? Because we nerd out about all of the federal contracting data and try to bring that to you. But what's great about today is reviewing last year's numbers. So it's 2023, summer of 2023 currently. And although the government spends or reports all of their spending, there is a lag. So that's why you're not going to see in January a recap of the 2022 spending for like woman-owned small businesses, 8A, small businesses, that type of thing. It takes a while for those numbers to come in. And frankly, even if I look at, so for instance, if you go to Sam.Gov, you can see a recap of federal spending, and you can do a lot of research too. I strongly urge that you go in there, start investigating, especially in the type of business that you have, because you can look up the specifics. But if you look up, say, 2022 numbers for engineering services provided to the government today, and then I looked at that same number a week from now, I wouldn't be surprised if that number changed. That's because some agencies have a lag in reporting. Sometimes there's de-obligation, so you might actually see a decrease. That's pretty normal, okay? But I just wanted to go over today some of the numbers for you guys. So wins and losses, what does federal spending look like? And remember, we are a big fan of the data and using the numbers, right? So remember, big picture, the government has to buy from small businesses, and less than 1% of small businesses are selling to the government. Now, there's still a decline, and last year showed the exact same thing, a decline in the number of small businesses engaging with the federal government, selling to the federal government. And once again, we see an increase in federal spending on small businesses. So if you're looking for an area where you could be effective, this is it. More spending and less businesses that you'd be competing with. It's just for you, it's just understanding the process, and that's why you're listening to the podcast. So let's take a look at the numbers. So the Small Business Association Administration, SBA, sets the standard. They set goals for the agencies. Each agency has specific goals, meaning a percentage of their contracts have to go to small businesses, or that's what they're shooting for. 23% is the overall average, okay? Now, overall, the federal government exceeded that goal. So 26.5% of spending in 2022 went to small businesses. And by the way, when I'm talking about 2022, 2023, this is fiscal year. The government fiscal year starts October 1st, and it ends at the end of September. Okay, so that's just something to know. So 26.5% went to small businesses. $162.9 billion spent last year on prime contracts with small businesses. Guys, that's a lot of money. And remember, that's across all of the categories, right? So we're not talking about, in fact, primarily we're not talking about weapons. We're talking about services and just ordinary things to support our troops, to support the government employees, maintaining the buildings, services provided to the government. A lot of small businesses are started by people that once worked for the government as a contractor, and then it came in and started a company to provide services, meaning it could be just them. Maybe they're providing 10 people to provide administrative assistance services, right? So there's a lot of different categories here, but $162.9 billion spent. It's an incredible amount of money. And it was an $8.7 billion increase from 2021. So we can see that trend, right? The government spending more. Unfortunately, less small businesses selling to the government. That's what we're trying to change here. Now, I mentioned that the SBA sets these goals, and you can go to SBA.gov. It's a government website, and you can go through all of the goals and the certifications and set-asides. So you can go through some of the other goals, right? So if you're a woman's own small business, or if you're 8A or HubZone or SDVOSB, which is service-disabled, veteran-owned small business, a lot of these certifications you have to apply for or go through a certification process for, and then that makes you eligible for these contracts when they come out. Okay, service-disabled, veteran-owned small business. So for those type of small businesses, the SBA sets a 3% goal overall, although it's higher in the VA. So if you're SDVOSB, you want to look at the VA for purchasing. There's a lot more SDVOSB purchasing there. Probably makes sense. And they have special language that we're not going to go over now in a lot of their policies. So 3% overall goal, and they achieved 4.6%. Okay, so that is an increase, and that is really good. And I'm looking at the numbers here. It looks like in 2021, $25 billion was spent, and in 2022, $28.1 billion was spent. So about a $3.1 billion increase for those type of businesses. And I have that type of business, so that's good for me. Just to be, selfish. So HubZone. HubZone, unfortunately, did not meet their goal, but they did have a $16.3 billion increase in spending. So it's the highest amount ever spent on HubZone companies. And HubZone, that's basically where your company is located, where your primary business location is located. There is a HubZone map. You can Google it, HubZone map, and there's a new one coming out, but you could see by your address if you're in a HubZone or not, and that will determine if you're eligible for those type of businesses. Now, I'm just looking at the chart here because I want to see what the exact numbers were. So 3% is the, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, 3% is the goal, and it looks like in 2022, 2.7% was increased. So they fell by about 0.3%. So that's HubZone. Women-owned small business also not met. The goal is 5% with WOSB, but it's not all bad news for women-owned small business. So $28.1 billion were spent on small woman-owned business contracts last year. And although that's under 5%, and keep in mind, 5% is higher than a lot of these other set-asides, right? So $28.1 billion, still a lot of money spent on women-owned small businesses, but they did not meet their goal. And looking at the chart here, it looks like 4.6%, it was the actual overall federal goal achieved, and that's the same as last year. But it was still an increase. $26.2 billion spent in 21, $28.1 billion spent in 2022 on woman-owned small businesses. I'm petting my dog here. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, that's what's going on. She's biting my hand. Okay. Her name's Georgia. Georgia Hey Howard, named by my children. Because she was born in Georgia, and apparently Hey is a chicken in Moana. I don't know. Hey almost became her name. Hey Howard. Anyway, I know I just went off on a weird tangent there. So on to small disadvantaged business, which I think is a success story. So small disadvantaged business. By the way, go to SBA.gov to see what qualifies you as a small disadvantaged business. And, there's 8A and some other things that are going to fall into that. But the goal is 5%. And they achieved 11.4% last year. So that's great. $69.9 billion spent on small disadvantaged businesses. That is a lot of money. And so if you fit into that category, I think it makes sense for you to start looking at government contracting, certainly, right? And look at what it takes to get the different certifications. There are different strategies involved, especially if you can qualify for 8A. By the way, guys, if you're listening to this, you don't need any of these set-asides, okay? It's not necessary to have these set-asides. I certainly never awarded a contract based on a set-aside. I frankly didn't care what the set-aside was. The only time it really becomes important is if the contract is already set aside for small business, or if you're trying to eliminate some competition, then you can certainly recommend to the government that they set something aside and you can eliminate some competition that way. But for the most part, concentrate on if you don't have one of these certifications, just concentrate on the solution you're providing and selling it to the right government customer. All right, where were we? 11%, 11.4% and $69.9 billion. It is a lot. So now the small business subcontracting goal was definitely achieved. Let's see here. This is subcontracting, right? So you may not be aware. I don't talk about it very often, but there's also a subcontracting goal. So a sub just means, if you're not familiar, that you wouldn't be the prime contract holder. So if the government awards company X a contract for $10 million to provide base services, right? And maybe one of those base services has something to do with maintaining buildings, and you know that your particular company can do that, well, then you could apply as a subcontractor. You could team up with a prime and just tell them, hey, look, we do like 30% of what this contract's asking for. That's what my company does. The prime, the company that's going to bid on the contract, they actually would own the contract with the government. They'd be doing the other 70%. You'd be doing the 30%. Now, there are goals associated with subcontracting, and some contracts have those subcontracting goals in there. So if you see an RFP, and typically the goal will be in there listed, but not always. Sorry, I'm getting a little congested here. So 30.9% subcontracting goal, $79.1 billion. So let me just check that. That seems really high. So let's see here. Yeah, the federal government achieved its small business subcontracting goals, 30.9% awarded, or $79.1 billion to subcontractors. That's pretty significant. That's really great. So what else can we look to last year for to give us some predictions of the future, just to inform us on the spending and the opportunity? Well, first, we could see a lot of increases, right? We see, I would say, increase in spending. This is really the same message from the year before. Increase in federal spending for small businesses, decrease in the total number of small businesses that are actually selling to the government. And I will get that in the couple articles that I just read. I didn't see the total number of small businesses, but I'll get those numbers for you. The improvements that are planned for next year, there's a lot of them. I'm just going to cover a couple of them, right? So one, there's going to be a new hub zone map that they're putting out. This may or may not affect you. What I would just tell you is you might be in a hub zone and not even know it. So find the hub zone map, input your address, and see if you fall into a hub zone. There's also going to be some new woman-owned small business NAICS codes. So there are authorized NAICS codes for women-owned small business set-aside contracts, and I guess they're going to be adding some of those this year. So my sense is, again, this is just a guess. My guess is that in order to meet the 5% set aside for women-owned small businesses, they want to increase the number of opportunities. So that's probably what's going on here. So I would just be aware that you might be seeing some more WOSB opportunities coming down the pipe. So hopefully this gives you a good overview of what happened in 2022, some of the challenges that we're facing, and some of the opportunities that are available for you, right? So a lot of the changes that the government tries to make will be either to hit those goals, to streamline the acquisitions process, to put checks and balances in place to make sure nothing nefarious happens, right? So hopefully you guys had a good takeaway from that in this podcast. Look, I would love to help you sell to the government, and we try to do that with this podcast. If you want more direct involvement from us, you can go to dodcontract.com. where we have an online portal. It's called DoD Contract Academy. You basically sign up for the academy. It's a monthly fee. You can cancel anytime, and you get all of our training, and you get weekly coaching from me and some of my associates, and you're also in a community with other small business owners. And look, we've got people in there that are just figuring out what niche they should be targeting, right? How do I figure out the most profitable niche where there's going to be low competition? I've got others in there that are selling to the government, and they're trying to optimize what they're doing. Hey, how do I do a better job of setting up meetings with the government? How do I do a better job of finding those opportunities ahead of time? Others are on contract with the government, right? And hey, Rick, this happened. What's the best way to increase my contract next year based on the wage rates that are out? So look, there are a lot of different things you can do to optimize, to increase the number of sales with the government. That's what we try to do in the academy, is help you through that process. So hopefully we will see you there. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're not already subscribed. Leave a recommendation, and in the recommendations, tell me what you want to hear. You know, we get recommendations and requests all the time to do different episodes. We'd love to hear your feedback, and we will see you next time.